fuck rock, man.
Right now.
Say fuck rock, son.
Say fuck rock.
What?
Say it. Hey.
Ain't no unzipping or nothing, son.
Say fuck rock.
Shorty said, get that with it. Don't be scared, little fuck. Don't be scared, little fuck.
Oh shit.
MBK block. MBK block, man. Been cut though, man. They heard my boys today was cut though, killer. KTSK and shit, man. I'm big fucking ABKK, man. Nah. And I don't care who I don't get no who watching me. Everybody know who the fuck I am. Ain't nobody stupid over here. I see him, I know him, man. That's a fucking goofy. That's a goofy, man. I know him.
It's getting out of control, and these kids and these young people need to stop. This killing is unnecessary. The shooting, all this violence, it doesn't make any sense.
The whole situation is unfortunate.
In the late hours of July 10th, 2021, a famous rapper would be shot dead moments after posting a $500,000 bond to leave jail. At around 8:50 p.m., just minutes after being released from Cook County Jail, 31-year-old famous rapper KTS Dre stepped into what should have been a moment of freedom. But little did he know, it would be his final one. As Dre made his way to his vehicle, he would be ambushed by two vehicles filled with masked gunmen. The shooters were ready. In an instant, 64 bullets ripped through the air, aiming for Dre. But this wasn't a random shooting, nor was it a crime of passion. The most unsettling part? Dre had seen this coming. This was more than a targeted hit. It was a calculated message. But who could want KTS Dre dead so badly that they would strike at such a public and daring moment? This wasn't just another case of street violence. It was the explosive end to a deep and deadly feud that had been brewing for far too long. This is the life and tragic death of rapper KTS Dre.
I got a mixtape, January, that bitch dropping. World is mine. Y'all finna have to suck my
31-year-old KTS Dre, born Londre Sylvester, was a drill rapper, songwriter, gangster, and a man whose name became synonymous with the streets of Chicago. Known by his alias, Cutthroat King, Dre was deeply tied to the KTS, Kill to Survive gang, a group whose reputation for violence and survival matched Dre's own personal narrative. But his rise to infamy didn't happen overnight. Dre's life was shaped by an environment that left little room for anything but survival. Within his community, he was both feared and respected, embodying the rough, unyielding culture of the streets. Born to Vanya Sylvester and Vincent Davis Sr., Dre's life was marked by tragedy early on. His father, Vincent, was a known gangster, and sources claim he was shot and killed by gunmen on July 25, 2016. But this wasn't the first time Dre had been confronted with death. His father's death marked a defining moment in Dre's life, as it came just months after another devastating blow, the loss of his brother, KTS Vaughn. On June 15, 2015, KTS Vaughn, who had just released a song, was gunned down by unknown gunmen. The coincidence of their father's death and his brother's shooting painted Dre's world with loss, violence, and a deep sense of vengeance. Growing up on the east side of Chicago, Dre's environment was one where survival was a daily challenge. With 7 siblings, including his younger brother, KTS Vinny, Dre found himself immersed in the dangerous and ever-present world of gangs. But the streets were both a battlefield and a home, a place where loyalty meant everything and respect was earned through bloodshed. His reputation as a tough and unrelenting fighter became his shield in a world where trust was scarce. But Dre's toughness wasn't just physical. It was psychological, shaped by years of hardship and betrayal. However, there was more to Dre than just the persona of a hardened gangster. Despite the constant violence surrounding him, Dre remained deeply connected to his family. His older brother, Earl, his younger brothers, Vinny and KTS Vaughn, and his cousins, including Zico, all played pivotal roles in his life. These familial bonds, forged in the heat of the streets, were the foundation of Dre's existence. But even as his ties to the KTS gang grew stronger, Dre struggled to find balance. Beneath the surface of the street-smart, feared gangster was a man with ambition, a man who wanted more than just survival. Though surrounded by the harsh realities of the criminal world, Dre's desire for a different life never completely faded. His love for music became an outlet, a way for him to express the pain, the violence, and the ambition that consumed him. It wasn't long before Dre started rapping. First, it was about his life, the losses, the betrayals, and then the constant fight to stay alive. His music, raw and unfiltered, became a reflection of his world, showcasing his personal struggle and the violent life he led. As his music career gained traction, Dre seemed to be on the verge of breaking free from his past. His mixtapes, filled with gritty lyrics, resonated with fans who could relate to his experiences. As he began to carve out a space for himself in the music industry, but the streets had other plans for him. The ties to his criminal past proved to be inescapable. Despite his ambitions, the life he had built in the gang world wouldn't let him go, eventually catching up with him in a way that no one could have predicted. On the night of July 10th, 2021, the streets of Chicago would bear witness to one of the most tragic and shocking moments in recent memory. KTS Dre, freshly released from Cook County Jail after spending over a year behind bars on a gun charge, stepped out of the facility with his family. Just moments before, Dre had posted a staggering $500,000 bond to leave jail. He had been eager to return to the streets, but little did he know his release would be short-lived. It was supposed to be a moment of freedom, a chance for Dre to leave his past behind and possibly focus on his music career. But that night, everything would change. At around 8:50 p.m., as Dre and two women, his mother and a close associate, walked from the jail, they were suddenly ambushed by two vehicles carrying several gunmen. In a sudden act of violence, the shooters opened fire, letting loose a barrage of 64 rounds. Dre, caught in the crossfire, was struck over 30 times with bullets tearing through his face and chest. His mother was shot in the knee, and another woman was grazed by a bullet to the face. The scene was chaotic as the gunmen fired relentlessly, hitting their targets with brutal precision. The attackers didn't just leave it at that. They didn't hesitate. They didn't stop until Dre's life was extinguished in front of a place where law enforcement was just a few steps away. The killers fled the scene, each vehicle heading in different directions as the police quickly responded to the gunfire. Dre, who had already survived many close calls in his life, wasn't so lucky this time. He was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, but was later pronounced dead at 9:25 p.m. It was obvious this attack wasn't just a random shooting. It wasn't an act of senseless violence. This was an execution. The shooters knew exactly what they were doing. They knew when Dre would be released, and they knew where he would be. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated attack carried out in front of one of the most heavily watched places in Chicago, the Cook County Jail. The question on everyone's mind, why would someone go to such lengths to take Dre's life? Was it a retaliation for something he had done in the past, or was it part of a larger, ongoing gang war? The truth would be harder to uncover than anyone could have imagined. As news of Dre's death spread, it sent shockwaves throughout the city. Chicago, already grappling with a long history of gang violence, now had to face the reality of another life lost to the streets. Dre's name wasn't new to the police or the community. He had spent years building a reputation, both as a street figure and as a rising rapper. His ties to KTS and his involvement in the violent gang culture of Chicago made him a prime target, but his death didn't make it any less shocking. The investigation into Dre's murder quickly became one of the most high-profile cases in Chicago's history. With the entire city buzzing about the tragedy, police were under immense pressure to find answers. But as with many gang-related shootings, it was not going to be easy. There were no witnesses, and the few who came forward were often too scared to testify. The situation was further complicated by the lack of solid evidence that could point directly to the attackers. Dre's past, full of enemies and rivals, made the case even harder to solve. The initial theory surrounding Dre's death pointed to an execution-style hit, likely planned by rival gang members. Chicago's gang wars were infamous, and Dre, with his affiliation to the KTS, Kill to Survive gang, had made his share of enemies. The police theorized that the shooting was an act of retaliation, possibly connected to the ongoing tensions between KTS and NLBM, No Limit members. The two gangs had been at war for years, each trying to outdo the other in a battle for control of Chicago's streets. Their ongoing feud with KTS had escalated over the years, and Dre had made no secret of his disdain for the rival group. But while the investigators had a motive, they lacked solid evidence to make an arrest. There was also the possibility that the murder was part of a deeper conspiracy. Someone within Dre's own circle may have had a hand in setting him up. Some speculated that Dre's release from jail and the conversations he had while inside could have been overheard by someone with a vendetta, providing the perfect opportunity for an attack. The investigation grew colder with each passing day. Dre's family, still reeling from the loss, struggled to find answers. Was this just another chapter in Chicago's unending cycle of violence? Or was there more to Dre's death than met the eye? Despite the clear intent behind the shooting, no one came forward to provide the key details. The streets of Chicago, especially those entrenched in gang culture, had their own rules. In this world, snitching was unforgivable, and witnesses who dared to speak out often faced terrifying consequences. Even though the shooting took place in front of the jail, a public space filled with law enforcement and civilians, the fear of retaliation kept most people silent. But the case would grow more complex as days passed. Investigators combed through surveillance footage from nearby cameras, interviewed potential witnesses, and canvassed the area around the jail. But there were no clear leads, and the police were left with little to work with. However, as the days turned into weeks, small pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Witnesses started to come forward, providing fragmented stories that pieced together a chilling picture of Dre's final moments. Some said they heard gunshots fired from 2 different vehicles, which led investigators to believe the shooters were not working alone.
A man named Andre Sylvester was leaving the jail. He went by the rap name KTS Dre. He'd just been bailed out, and police say he was ambushed by 2 men who got out of a vehicle near the jail. Sylvester was shot as many as 64 times and pronounced dead at Mount Sinai. A 60-year-old woman who was with him was shot in the knee and taken to Stroger. A second woman in her 30s was standing nearby when that chaos broke out. She suffered a graze wound to the face. She was taken to Mount Sinai as well, and both women were in good condition at last check.
The fact that 2 cars were involved in the shooting suggested that this was not a spontaneous attack. It seemed well coordinated, and the use of semi-automatic weapons pointed to a highly organized operation. While there was no solid evidence to point directly to the perpetrators, the theory that Dre's death was an orchestrated act of retaliation continued to hold weight. The more investigators dug into Dre's past, the clearer it became that his death was part of a larger, more complicated narrative. Dre had been involved in multiple violent incidents over the years, and his name was linked to a string of murders, retaliatory attacks, and gang wars. But what made Dre's death different was the public nature of the attack. The shooters weren't just targeting a known gang member, they were sending a message that went beyond Dre and struck at the heart of the gang violence plaguing Chicago. The impact of Dre's death was felt across Chicago, but none were affected more than his family. His mother, who had been injured in the shooting, was left to cope with the unimaginable loss of her son. The traumatic experience of witnessing her son's brutal murder in front of her eyes was something that no parent should ever endure. Dre's family was devastated, not just by his death, but by the aftermath of violence that followed. His mother, still recovering from her own injuries, found herself thrust into the public eye, forced to grieve in the glare of the media spotlight. But it wasn't just the loss of her son that weighed heavily on her heart. It was the reality of the streets and the cyclical nature of violence that claimed her son's life. In the days following Dre's death, his family held a private mourning period, and many of Dre's fellow gang members attended his funeral, paying their respects to a fallen comrade. The streets of Chicago, once a battleground, would forever carry the mark of KTS Dre's presence. The community's reaction to Dre's death was equally complex. While some saw him as a victim of the streets, others believed that Dre had made his own choices that ultimately led to his tragic demise. As with many gang-related deaths, there were those who mourned his passing, while others saw it just as another casualty of the violence that defined the city. In the aftermath of the shooting, some members of the community called for change, for an end to the violence that had taken too many lives.
There were also calls for greater police presence in areas like Dre's neighborhood, with the hope that more could be done to combat gang violence and provide safety to those who were trapped in the cycle of crime. But for many, the streets remained dangerous and unforgiving, and there were no easy solutions to the problems that had plagued the city for so long. As KTS Dre's funeral was held, it was clear that his death was more than just another gang-related shooting. His murder marked the end of a chapter for a man who had lived his life as a gangster, a rapper, and a figure whose name was synonymous with Chicago's troubled streets. The violent nature of Dre's death, the 64 shots fired in his direction, served as a symbol of the unrelenting violence that plagued the south side of Chicago. It was an execution-style hit, but more than that, it was a message, a warning to anyone who dared cross the lines of the deadly game of gang violence. Dre had spent years in the streets, earning respect through fear and loyalty to his gang. But like so many others trapped in the cycle of violence, his death was inevitable. Chicago's gang wars, long-standing and deeply rooted, left little room for redemption. For Dre, the fight had finally come to an end. But the city's ongoing struggle with gun violence, crime, and gang wars continued. KTS Dre's death was not an isolated incident. It was the tragic conclusion of a series of violent events that had marred the lives of his family and friends. Dre's younger brother and father were also gunned down. The streets that raised Dre had also claimed the lives of those closest to him, creating a vicious cycle of loss and grief that seemed impossible to escape. The loss of KTS Dre, KTS Fawn, and their father, Big Vinny, was felt throughout the gang community. The KTS Kill to Survive gang had lost some of its most well-known and feared members. While the gang's members mourned the loss, they also knew that this loss would be avenged. And so the cycle would continue, an endless war between rival gangs, each trying to gain power and control regardless of the cost in lives. For the people who grew up in these neighborhoods, this tragic pattern was all too familiar. The streets of Chicago were often seen as a battleground where survival was the ultimate goal. But the toll this lifestyle took on the community was devastating. Not just the victims, but their families, friends, and loved ones, all caught in the crossfire of a world where violence was a way of life. As we look at KTS Dre's death in the tragic pattern of violence in Chicago, it becomes clear that the city's gang violence crisis is deeply ingrained and difficult to break. The lack of law enforcement resources dedicated to solving crimes in neighborhoods like Dre's only exacerbates the issue. While some homicide cases go unsolved, others are dismissed as just another part of the city's violent landscape. The statistics speak for themselves. Over 80% of the homicides in Chicago's south and west sides go unsolved, while cases in wealthier neighborhoods receive more attention and resources. This systemic issue leaves families like Dre's to mourn in silence, with little hope that justice will be served. And for those still involved in the streets, the reality of life in these neighborhoods remains unchanged. Violence is often the only way to settle disputes, and the cycle of retaliation continues. As long as this violence persists, the streets of Chicago will remain dangerous, and stories like Dre's will keep being written. What do you think about it? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found the story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.